Hello and welcome to this special NPQ convening responding to COVID-19. My name is Jean Bell. I direct the Advancing Practice program here at the Nonprofit Quarterly, and I'm going to serve as the moderator for today's conversation. First, we want to say that we hope that you and your loved ones are healthy, that you're staying safe. We know this is a very anxious time in our personal lives and in our organizational lives. We appreciate you taking an hour today to be in community with us. We hope this conversation with this thoughtful panel provides a little bit of respite and maybe some inspiration to how you're grappling with the issues that COVID-19 presents. I want to pause here and thank our generous sponsor for today's session, Donor Perfect. They stepped up for us in this critical time and helped us move quickly and provide us financial support so that this session is free of charge. And I'm just going to share a little bit more information about Donor Perfect. It's designed to equip fundraisers with time-saving tools and actionable data that helps them achieve their goals. And in this time of working remotely and working from home, Donor Perfect places important metrics at your fingertips and empowers teams to manage donor data and communications from one system. See how easy it is to engage your community no matter where you're based. And I can't think of a more important time to be in communication with your donors thoughtfully. So thank you to Donor Perfect for underwriting today's session.
Hello? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I am going to try to fill in for the much more capable Jean Bell in facilitating this, and thanks to all of you people, wonderful people who hung on during that terrible snafu. We seem to be having some overload issues in the entire internet system, to judge from what we've been experiencing this morning. So we deeply apologize, and we're going to move forward very quickly. And I'm actually going to, I don't know what the rest of what Jean was going to say was going to be as an intro, but I'm going to move pretty directly to questions for our panelists so that we can make sure that they get on. And I'm going to I'll put my own questions to myself last. I'll be like a DA, drilling myself at the end. What do you mean by that? But to start off right now, I want to start with Rashad, if you don't mind, Rashad, and ask you the first set of questions. The first question is, you lead a people-driven platform to address injustice, Color of Change, with over 1.5 million members and a host of campaigns. How are you and your team framing COVID-19, and where are you locating it in your work, the work to create a more human and less hostile world for Black people and all people?
First of all, thank you for having me on the call. Thank you to everyone for joining. Color of Change was founded in the digital age as a digitally native organization but in the aftermath of a flood, which was Hurricane Katrina, that was caused by bad decision makers and turned to a life-altering disaster by those same bad decision makers. It wasn't just a flood, but it was a flood of bad decisions that preceded it and followed it. And in so many ways, being able to directly understand how we frame the decisions that got us here, the decisions that are keeping us in this crisis, and the decisions that we need to make to get out of it is critically important. Moving people from awareness to action is deeply important in this crisis. And also being able to really recognize the power of narrative infrastructure. So Color of Change has had over 1.5 million people take action with us in the last 8 months. That's how we think about our membership. But part of the other thing that we have to think about is, how do we dig in and ensure that we are reaching beyond the choir of the people that we're talking to? And so helping to ensure that our actions and our activities are reaching other audiences. And so we've partnered with BET on a weekly newsletter. The first one came out on Monday, and the next one will come out next Monday, and every Monday after that, where we're giving people really clear things that they can do, actions that they can take while also trying to leverage this moment to build power and energy around really sort of big systemic change that we know will be necessary to being able to move us out of this crisis. And so for us, it's about taking people from awareness to action. It's about ensuring that action is strategic and connected to the harms and the pains that people are actually feeling right now. It's about leveraging narrative infrastructure to reach beyond the choir. You know, we are in a moment, an unprecedented moment where people are looking at more screens than they've ever seen before, but our ability to actually break through earned media will be diminished in ways that we haven't seen. So we're dealing with those two things. One is that you can't actually break through on earned media. One is that people are actually paying attention to screens. And so we actually have to put more resources and money behind a digital ad buys, digital engagement, paying to move our content in ways. And that, you know, changes some of the context and natures of the budget. And so we're quickly responding to engage with that. You know, we're focused on how do we grow our text messaging and other platforms so that we're reaching people across many different forms. And then how are we leveraging video, animation, a whole set of other content to inspire, activate, engage. The important thing here, right, is just like in Hurricane Katrina, no one was nervous about disappointing Black people. It wasn't just those issues. And we recognize at Color of Change that when America gets the cold, Black people get the flu. And in so many ways, what we have to recognize here is how do we build a collective response, the collective power and engagement, also the ability to hold issues and systems accountable. And the one quick example I will give about why racial justice is so important in this issue, not just for what we're facing now, but the story we tell about how we get out of it. Let's just say hospitals determine very clearly that, you know, these are the type of conditions by which someone these preconditions are the type of conditions that someone doesn't get a ventilator. And all of those conditions are the type of preconditions that Black people and probably Native people are more likely to have. We could have our hospitals around the richest country on the planet have segregated hospitals where one side are Black and brown people dying. On the other side are white people and rich people getting the type of health and protection that they need. Part of why advocacy and racial justice is because the story we have about the recovery is the work and the activism we fund and support now. And being able in a digital age to reach people with very clear things, to build power and to break through the noise is clearly what we're focused on.
Thank you very much, Rashad. That's, you know, gave us a platform to work from. And I'm going to change what I just said and talk for a second about, you know, we're all responding to this at multiple levels. We're responding on a personal level, organizational level, societal level, you know, our workplaces, whatever. And in each one of those, the frameworks that we're using to respond and to describe what we're experiencing are so important. And I think that's what Rashad was just talking about. When we talk about narrative change and we look at some of the language that's being used on this right now, we really have to question, are we doing the right kind of work? So for instance, the very common expression now being used is social distancing. And I think of all of the things that we might use to describe the way society's been going over the past few years, social distancing is a pretty good description. Do we need more of that? We might need to, you know, stay apart from each other physically right now, but we do not need to social distance. And I think that this is where we get caught up in not understanding the way the words we use really matter to the outcome that we're trying to promote. So just to say one other thing, that I think that to pick up on Rashad's point, the idea of returning to normal is something that I think we have to resist. I think what we're trying to do is actually to advance, because what COVID is doing is it's placed itself on top of a system that was already in so much tension and tumult around some basic issues of fairness and equity. that to try to return to normal from this extreme place is a waste of opportunity. And there has to be something different that we do in response to this that takes us someplace different. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Crystal, next, go a little bit out of order, and ask you if, since you've worked at the intersections of public health broadly defined and philanthropy for years, from your perspective, how are we seeing this public health crisis affect how organizers and service providers go about their critical work?
Great, thank you. Thank you all for joining today. I'll just start out with a couple of brief comments. I think that, as Rashad and Ruth have just mentioned, this is a disease caused by a virus, but this is a pandemic caused by decades of underinvestment in infrastructure and by inequality. So we have to recognize that both of those things are happening at the same time. And what we are seeing here now is that the public health response has to be clear. It has to come from trusted resources, because we're not seeing that leadership from the federal government. And it has to have information for people to take clear action steps. So for those of us in philanthropy, many of us have funded social services, food banks, clinics, etc. What I think we're seeing right now is that those organizations are under intense stress, but those organizations also have to be partnering with community-based organizations that are doing organizing, because those are many organizations that are trusted messengers. In this age right now of ICE, in immigrant communities, people need to, they're not going to open the door for almost anybody, but they definitely need to know, excuse me, that the text that they're getting is from somebody that they know. And so we need to make sure that there's unusual partnerships that are happening here, even as the organizations are stressed and really experiencing difficulty. Organizations that normally work on just services also need to be active in the public policy conversation right now. We know that we can try and get food to people who don't have food and try and raise more money to do that. And we also need to be focusing on a people's stimulus package that gets dollars to people right now who need it desperately. One of the most important things in a public health response is for people not to feel panicked, not to feel desperate. And for many gig workers, low-wage workers, people who've lost their jobs, there is a sense of real doom and fear setting in. So getting dollars into people's hands as soon as possible is going to be really important. So we really need to be focusing on that stimulus process. Finally, I would just say, for those funders out there, we have to stop doing business as usual. I commend all of you, our foundation did, who signed on to the letter asking people to stop doing business as usual, to give general operating support, to eliminate the bureaucratic reports and things. That's all well and good. It's a minimum standard of what we need to be doing now.
Right.
Right, honestly, people need money. The nonprofits that we have been funding, who we say are our partners, are telling us that they need more dollars. I know this is a really difficult conversation for us to have in the foundation world right now, even as people are seeing their endowments go down. But think about this. We are closer in this moment to where we were in the Great Depression than we were with the Great Recession. And so it's really incumbent upon those of us who have access to resources to pause, take a deep breath, and really ask ourselves, where are we placing ourselves in the moral arc of the universe? This is one of those moments when leadership needs to be brave, needs to be courageous, and needs to do things that are stepping out beyond our comfort zone. And I think that's what many of us know in our hearts we want to do, and I hope we can do that together. I'll stop there.
I so appreciate that, Crystal. We've been calling at NPQ, we've been calling for people to double on their payout over last year, because there's an opportunity here to make some headway, which if philanthropy refuses to take that opportunity, it is making a clear choice. And I think we have to call that out. I couldn't appreciate more what you just said in terms of a challenge. Ted, let's go to you. and talk a little bit at the organizational level. You're an organizational risk management specialist. With something like this that hits organizations this quickly and substantially, what are the 2 or 3 must-do approaches or mindsets that you can advise executive staff and boards of nonprofits to pay attention to?
Thanks, Ruth. And can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, there are lots of things that you should do right now, and if I only touch 2 or 3 of them, I want to make sure that people understand that there are additional steps that they can take. And if they want to take those additional steps, there's a checklist that we have on our website at RiskAlts that they'll be able to take a look at. So if they go to RISKALTS, you can download that checklist. The 3 things that I would say are most important, though, right now are, first of all, ensure business continuity for yourselves, even if that means cutting back slightly on your operations in the very short term. What I mean by that is that people within the sector have big hearts. We want to stretch ourselves, and we are inclined to stretch ourselves, particularly in times of trouble. Of course you ought to do that, but you should first make sure that you are taking care of yourselves. Because if you don't take care of yourselves, you're not going to be there for those who are in need. The second point that I would emphasize is to make sure as you reach out into your communities that you are not only not doing bad things, but that you are protecting your community as you act. So by that, I mean, follow the local rules in your jurisdiction scrupulously, taking all reasonable steps to make sure that your organization is not a vector for disease as we try to combat this disease going forward. Look for emerging best practices and follow those best practices. Third, while it's tempting to focus on the immediate short term, I urge everyone to keep their eyes as well toward the future. And by that, I mean scenario plan. First of all, what if we face a 10% increase in demand while having a 15% decrease in our budget? What are we going to do 6 months from now, 9 months from now, 12 months from now under that scenario? The purpose of that question is not to predict the future, but instead to think, what can we do now to be more robust in the face of this uncertainty? A similar question might be, what if we lose some key personnel? Someone becomes seriously ill as a result of this disease. That question might prompt us in our all-staff meetings to say, look, however busy we are, let's take an hour and a half out of the next 40 hours and scrupulously write down on 2 pages exactly what you do on a weekly basis so that if you aren't there, someone else can pick up for you. Now, that's what I would say. In short, continuity, don't do any harm, and think toward the future through scenario planning. I'll just end, Ruth, by saying that we're also going to have some virtual office hours tomorrow if people have additional questions. And in this time more than any other, we should be reaching out for connection rather than turning turtle.
That's great. I'm rushing a little bit because I want to leave some time for questions, but I want to set up the next question to Rashad by saying this, that we just finished doing some extensive research on what happened to nonprofits during the last recession. And it's brand new information, so people who haven't checked it out should check it out on our website. We published 2 important articles last week on it. Our major finding, I have to say, is that in general, the nonprofit sector, because they're brilliant and know what they're doing, did fairly well during the recession. We lost very few nonprofits. We continue to grow the number of employees that we employ. Although a lot of us took some hits, we bounced back after the recession for the most part. You know who didn't, though, was the communities we serve. The communities we serve, people who were at the lowest margins of the economy and even the middle margins of the economy took wealth hits during the recession, which they never recovered. If we allow that to happen again in this coming period, because of this new crisis, we are heaping bad practice on bad practice. So as we move forward, unless we're paying attention to our advocacy agendas, then we may just be colluding with the forces that be, and we don't need to do that. We need to provide some counterbalance. So this is all leading into Rashad's next question, which is, at Color of Change, you lift up the power of culture and representation in culture. Just thinking about how do we need to comport ourselves? How do we need to communicate? Do you have any thoughts on that during this, what's a very extraordinary period?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about it. I also think that
and anything else I want to encourage you to say anything else in response to other people that you've heard so far.
I think we are dealing with a lot of radical shifts that this crisis has taken shape, but shifts that have been happening in terms of the way that we communicate, the way that we think, the way that we organize, the way that we structure ourselves. And so some examples that over the last, 10 years in particular, but the last 5 years in a more steady pace, we have increasingly moved from being locked to geographic communities and moving increasingly into virtual communities. A lot of that has been fueled by the internet and fueled by all sorts of tools. But, an extended period of time where we cannot be connected to our geographic spaces and the places that we live and the people that might live down the street from us and may actually have more relationship with the people that we are connected with online, that is going to change shape into how we connect. It's going to change shape in terms of how we think about physical offices. It's going to change shape in how we think about strategy. This is not to say that when things change and go potentially back to some different way of engagement that we may not be knocking on doors again, but it will mean that we will have developed new tools and systems of reaching people over these next several months and potential year. And as a result, people will also have developed new systems for engaging us, for when we answer the door, for when we let people into our community. These things will be changing, and as a result, they will change the way that we have to think about advocacy work, that we think about service work, and we think about all the ways in which that type of work intersects the delivery of services and goods, the building of power and political voice, and the execution of it. So many strategies and tactics that we've held close to will be changing in different ways, and we're going to have to figure out over time what's effective and what's not, and what we give up that we might have been holding close to. And so, as an organization that's, less than 15 years old, there were a lot of strategies and tactics that really animated how the civil rights movement worked that we never actually took on. And a lot of ways that we structure our organization that we never took on. But I'm even having to look at and ask really tough questions about things that we're doing and things that we will do. And ask the tough questions about, does that make sense over the next year? What are the things that we continue to invest in, and what are the things that we don't invest in? And I think that there's a lot of opportunity in that. There's pain in all of these things, but there's opportunity in being able to align our work with the mission and with the potential for actual real change. The other things is that in crisis, hopefully, people, if we are not just driven by fear, we have the ability to ask for and demand big and visionary things. And unlike 2008, where I think so much of the work at the national level was about protecting a kind of recent electoral win that was historic at the federal level for race and so many other implications, we're not in that place right now. And so the ability to both fight the kind of lessons learned from '08 around the role of corporate power. All of those things are things that I think the public is much more attuned to, just from a narrative power perspective, power around certain ideas that we didn't have power around. All of those things I think are going to be incredibly important. But the thing as someone who both thinks about these issues and then has to execute, has to have the infrastructure so things actually get out the door and we have the ability to evaluate it, none of that matters if we don't have people that can show up to work, feel safe, feel protected as much as possible, and feel like they have the tools to do their work. And so I really just want to appreciate all of the things that have been said about the importance of general operating funding, the importance of resources and support to organizations that are going to be the ones that get us out of this crisis and get us out of this crisis, hopefully with a sense of new power. Leaning in now will give us the ability to be creative, will give us the ability to think long term, and will give us the ability to not just be in fight mode, but to be in aspiration mode. And so I think the question is, for those that invest in ideas, institutions, and individuals, is to double down on those bets and to also think very clearly about the skill set and the sort of changes to our communication that are going to be needed as we move forward.
Geez, well said. That was worth the price of admission right there.
Yeah.
Crystal, I'm just going to go straight to you. And your question is, and please also respond to anything else that other people said. What are you seeing from institutional philanthropy and high net worth donors in the past days or weeks that you think is promising and relevant? And what philanthropic practices need to change for the better right now? Before I hand that to you, though, Crystal, let me encourage audience members to go ahead and log in your own questions if you have them for any of the panelists. And we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. You can go to the, I think it's the comments box or the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen and just log them in. Okay, so now, Crystal, do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I think that's great. I can jump right in. I think one of the things that we've seen from philanthropy that's helping, that I think is very helpful, is people showing up on webinars like this, listening, not necessarily calling every grantee every other hour to ask them what's happening, which can overwhelm them as well. But really, putting your ear to the ground and trying to understand this kind of broadly, right? And I think that's really important. I think the ability for philanthropy to combine funding is something that we don't do very well. We often ask our grantees to collaborate, but we don't always do that well. And I think one of the things I'm really seeing in this crisis right now is that we are seeing more pooled funds. We're seeing people putting money into the CDC Foundation, which is a fantastic public health run initiative that's looking nationally at how to get more medical supplies to the places that need it, those kinds of things. We're seeing groups like NDN Collective and others that are putting resources together in Native communities. Urgent Action Fund, which is putting money together to work specifically in communities of color. We're seeing funds like Rock United and One Fair Wage, which are creating a pooled fund that's really going to be focusing on tipped workers. Groups like the National Domestic Workers Alliance, which is going to get funds directly to caregivers, nannies, people who are providing that frontline care. The more philanthropy can really pool those dollars, community foundations that are really responding directly at the local level. All of those are the kinds of things that I think we should be doing, as opposed to seeing foundations necessarily jumping out on their own. Certainly work directly with your grantees. I think that's really important. The moving more dollars towards general operating support is really critical, and I'll just say a few things. Friends of mine, we're in Silicon Valley, we hear a lot. There are ways in which those critical general operating support dollars allow nonprofits to do important things. In the tech world, people talk a lot about the pivot. right? When you get the money in and you think this is going to be the way that you're going to make your money and this is the way you're going to run your business, and then you find out that's not actually the world you're living in, then you have to pivot to a different strategy. And in order to do that, you have to have the resources to innovate. We're seeing people doing that. Food banks that had large kitchens set up to provide hot meals to people that have literally in 5 days' time switched over to having drive-through where people can pick up so that they have less interaction with people and can keep their volunteers, their employees, and the people who need the food come by. We see, in our area, for the school districts have switched on a dime to being able to provide drive-through food access for kids who otherwise would have had a free lunch and breakfast. So we really need to be able to see people, organizations, groups like the Center for Community Change, which are, really now doing nothing less than redesigning what a community organizer is. They have to have the resources to say, now we need to go not just from door knocking, but to digital. And those general operating support dollars allow them to do that. I often hear people in the investing world, they're very concerned right now about the dip in the stock market, and people talk a lot about that. We have to recognize too that the economy is driven by consumers. And in order to get those dollars into those folks' hands on a regular basis, we need to think about innovation at the federal level as well. In the UK, they've just announced that they are requiring employers, that the government will pay 80% of salaries, and they're requiring employers to continue to pay people salaries. That's something that seems really radical, but in fact, it's actually a policy that we should think about and really be considering here, because how are we going to keep people functioning through this is going to be really important. Finally, I would just say that we also hear the terms, when people who are investors talk about investing through the downturn. Right? People don't freeze their dollars when the stock market goes down. They actually start thinking about ways they can free up capital to invest through the downturn. We need philanthropy to take the same attitude as well. We have to invest in our nonprofits through the downturn so that they can come out innovating, switching their strategies when necessary, keeping their employees and communities safe, and stronger for it with better innovation policies, in the months to come. Finally, I just want to say one important thing too. We have to keep awareness of the fact that this is 2020. The census is still going on. It's been delayed. Those groups that are doing that still need the resources to do that. We've heard a few organizations that have started to pull back dollars from census organizations because they're concerned about their use. Please don't do those kinds of things. We also need to focus on what's going to happen in this election year so that we don't lose control of our democracy. So vote by mail is going to be something you're going to hear more and more about. And I think it's something that absolutely at the state and federal level we need to be thinking about, because people should not have to choose between their own personal health and safety and exercising their right to vote. So we need to get on that as well as soon as possible. And I see that as a critical part of the philanthropic and charitable response in this moment.
Great. I mean, yeah, it is a moment of great extremes. It is interesting to me that we were already in such an enormously tense place when this hit. We were already feeling the faults that were part of the ground that we walk on, and feeling the tremors. And this has just kind of brought that all into, it's just exposed all of those faults. And it's a point where there really is a choice. Are we going to take this on with a vision of a society where equity and justice is at the core, or are we going to do something different which just worsens where we have been up until now? And that really is in part, it's very much a discussion that philanthropy absolutely has to take a lead in. I do want to say that the letter that Crystal has referred to is on the Council Foundation's website, and you can sign on there to it. the not doing business the way we have been doing business letter. And I think that is really conceived as being just a start for a change in philanthropic practice. But Ted, I'm going to go to you now and just ask you to talk a little bit, and I'm not going to go to the question that we had for you, but what we have been talking about here, I think very much, is the idea of embracing risk rather than fearing or trying to manage risk. It really is a question of how do we embrace it and use it. Because at this point, we are all at risk. We understand that. We're in a community of risk right now together. What do we do with that?
Right, Ruth. And to echo what you and Rashad and Crystal have said, I mean, risk management is nothing but radical awareness of what is going on and then taking the next reasonable step in response. As Rashad was pointing out, risk is not all the downsides. Yeah, there are threats out there, but risk also critically involves opportunities. There are real opportunities here for the sector to increase its leadership in the United States. And to that end, everyone always worries about 501c3s being political in some sense. Ask any reputable person, and they will say, you have an obligation to speak up on behalf of your target communities. There are very few actual restrictions on what a nonprofit can do as to advocacy in a general sense on behalf of their communities. And so if there's one thing that comes out of this overall, I would say each of us, if we care about the sector, needs to speak up on behalf of our communities to make sure that they are protected and advanced through this crisis. So keep in mind, risk management means just addressing what's before us in the best possible way we can.
That's great.
Excellent. So, sorry, we have had lots of questions from the audience, and you all know we're having some technical difficulties. So I haven't been able to access them. I'm going to give everybody a chance to just talk, kind of like advising the individual listener on what it is that they need to take away from this webinar. And what they need to be thinking about in terms of really trying to help us all as a community come to terms with this moment, not just come to terms with this moment, but make the most of it. So I'm going to go first to you, Crystal, and then I'm going to go to Rashad and Ted. And I apologize for our technical difficulties, and we will look at your questions and develop our next webinar around them. That is my my commitment to you. So let's go to you, Crystal.
I would just say my closing remarks are really that this is an opportunity for each of us to stand in our full humanity. These are really difficult times. And as leaders, I think we cannot deny the challenges that we're experiencing. And so we have to uplift and open ourselves up to our own vulnerabilities. We have to ask for help. And we have to recognize that we are maybe physically distancing, but physical distancing is really the same as social solidarity. We are locking arms with each other virtually. And that is really important. We have got us. We will get us through this. And so that would be what I would say is we just have to sit down and really think about the fact that there's no time left to hedge our bets, to try and think of the best perfect language to say it. We just kind of got to say it and do it and be there for the communities that we care about and stop doing business as usual.
Okay.
So
Rashad.
what I will say is that, at my organization, we are a rapid response digital organization. So we're constantly trying to think about how to shift and how to change, but even this is challenging us in deep ways. And, right now, ramping up all of our sort of infrastructure to just do digital trainings for organizations and leaders locally and try to take some of the skills and platforms we have to support our community partners. This change, these shifts, this responding to crisis is what communities do. And in so many ways, what we need is the support and trust to be able to do this. I remember starting as the field director at GLAD back in 2005. And, one night late being in some files in my office, it was before everything was digital, and seeing, work and content being built by so many men who lost their lives during the HIV and AIDS epidemic when America turned their back on folks who were not deemed worthy, a crisis that did not have a clear response, and community had to come together to demand more. And that innovation created so much of what we understand about activism, about social change, about what I understand today about culture change and narrative change and how to change the story. I know that this will be a crisis that will harm so many of us, and it will not impact all of our communities the same way. And it will be important that we trust, support, and invest in those people that can write their own story for liberation, write their own story for what our future can look like, and build the type of power that truly changes the rules. And in the process, we will deal with that crisis. But supporting and investing in the organizations that have the ability and track record to lead, the ideas and the institutions that can move us forward will be critical.
Perfect. Ted?
Well, I'd like to go micro just for a moment. I saw in the comments that there were questions about what should a board be doing, what should funders be doing right now. If you're on a nonprofit board, be supportive, but make sure you don't micromanage. Let your managers do their job. Make sure that you're not getting in the way. If you're a funder, do you really need that virtual site visit? Do you really need to be asking for a report? If not, if you can't be a part of a solution, then at least get out of the way so that your nonprofits can do their jobs.
Great.
Okay. So I'm going to close it out by just reiterating a few things that people have said. And the first thing that I want to say is I love, Crystal, I love your admonition that we need to engage in physical distancing but social solidarity. Beautifully said. I think we need to pick it up and use that. It's our bumper sticker. And I love, Rashad, what you said about building power to change the rules, but also what you talked about this being a really new time in terms of the way we can communicate with each other and do this work. That we should not be thinking only about organizations. We need to be thinking about movements, what we can learn from past movements, but what we are learning every day now about how to create the kind of society that we want to create. So that in some ways it's a very exciting piece of work. So at the same time that we're experiencing this somewhat terrifying moment, we should also be exhilarated in terms of that we actually started building towards a movement before COVID ever hit. We need to intensify that at this point. And then going to Ted, it's just like trying to understand what the short and the long-term options are. How do we get from here to there and not just stay at, trying to get back to the way we were, but actually try to advance the issues that we care about. That if you make that an absolute priority in your work, what does that mean about the way that you reorganize your work? What does that mean about the way that you communicate with various stakeholders in your system? And what does that mean about what you need from your supporters? So with all of that, I want to ask, everybody who has stayed with us on the webinar to go ahead and log your questions in. We'll keep it in for a minute or so. We're going to send you a brief evaluation, and so please fill that out because it'll help us to understand. Both things will help us understand what we need to present to you next time. And I want to thank very much Rashad Robinson, who we admire from afar most of the time. It's been a thrill to be on this with you. And Crystal Haling, who we also just, she's an awesome partner, and Ted Billich, who you should keep an eye on and make sure you go to his more intimate, what do you do in your organization session tomorrow. Thank you all so much for being a part of this first of a series of webinars on how we need to approach this crisis opportunity. And we will look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, NPQ.